It's November 20th, and we are in York, Nebraska with Leo Kloewer, who is a Vietnam War veteran. So when and where were you born?
I was born in Manila, Iowa, 1945.
Okay.
Yes, long time ago.
What are your parents' names?
Vince and Ruby.
Okay. And did you grow up in Manila?
Yes.
How would you describe your childhood?
How would I describe my child? Small town farm boy.
Okay. And what about a little bit about your wife and kids?
A little bit about my wife and kids. Well, my wife is a small town farm girl. uh, we adopted our kids from Korea at the age of 10 months and 3 months.
Okay. And is there a military background in your family at all?
No.
No? Okay. So you were the first one, kind of?
Well, I had 3 uncles in World War II,
Okay.
but
Gotcha.
other than that, none.
Okay. All right. So what were you doing prior to the war starting or prior to your awareness of the war?
I was in college at Northwest Missouri.
Okay.
You're familiar with that.
Yep. And were you a volunteer or drafted?
I was drafted.
Okay. And how old were you when you entered the war, or what year?
I was 22
Do you know what year that was?
of 1968.
Okay. And what was your reaction to that?
You mean being drafted?
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's get these 2 years in and get them over with.
Okay.
I remember saying that to myself.
Yeah. So, did you want to, or?
Well, I just thought it'd be good for me.
Yeah. And how did it disrupt your life?
Well, I wanted to go back to college, but and get my degree and start teaching, but well, I guess I had to do that too.
Okay.
Because everybody else was getting drafted, so
Mm-hmm.
didn't want to be the lone stranger.
So, did you go back to college after the war?
Yes.
How'd your family feel about you going to Vietnam?
Well, they didn't hardly say anything. Uh, about the only thing I can remember of that is, well, the day I left, Mom was crying.
Okay.
And she said, make sure you come back. I said, I will.
Where did you have to go for training, and what did that entail?
Well, I went basic, I was in the Army. I went to basics to Fort Lewis, Washington.
Okay.
And that was the month of January and February in '68. And it rained. I hardly ever saw the sun. It was raining all the time, it seemed like. If it wasn't rainy, it was cloudy and misty, and I can see why Seattle has the highest number of suicide in the United States.
Yeah.
It's a pretty gloomy place, weather-wise, that is.
So what kind of did your training
Oh,
include?
and then after basic training, I went to Fort Ord, Washington, or Fort Ord, California. And that's right by San Francisco. And now don't laugh, I tell you what I was trained. I was trained to learn how to drive Jeeps. I never did drive a Jeep in the service, but that's what I was trained for.
Okay. And when you were leaving for the war, what was your attitude, your thoughts?
Well, how should I wouldn't say I was scared or anything like that. It was just like, it's just something different.
Mm-hmm.
I never experienced before.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So how did you learn or like receive information about the war while you were there fighting?
Really, we didn't.
You didn't?
No, my mom would send me articles from back home from what was going on in the war, and I'd read them. I go, that's not exactly right.
Oh yeah.
For what we're getting at our end.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Interesting. Did that, like reading those articles, did that change your perspective on anything?
No, we was there, and you was there for a year, so
Mm-hmm.
do your job, and yeah, when it's time to go home, go home.
Okay.
Or as we say, go back to the world. We called the
Yeah.
United States the world.
So what was your understanding of why the United States was involved in Vietnam?
Well, I tell you what, if you've seen all the poverty and oh, what do you want to call it? What the people were going through,
Mm-hmm.
you know, you can understand why I was there. But unfortunately, while I was there, the people kind of treated you like, hell with you, GI, give me your dollar.
Okay.
You know, because they knew we were rich,
Mm-hmm.
richer than them, should we say.
Yeah.
And they just wanted some money to be able to better themselves.
Okay. Were you frustrated at all with the United States fighting in the war?
At the time, no.
Okay.
Was more frustrated with what was going on back home.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what really ticked us off there.
Okay. Can you describe the atmosphere of what it was like?
What it was like, the war?
Mm-hmm.
That's a good question. Well, I was with a armored cavalry outfit. That's where we had tanks and personnel carriers and helicopters. And my job was to resupply. I was in resupply. I would load trucks and drive a truck somewhere, unload it, and you know, so everybody has their supplies. But as far as the attitude toward, I don't know, you just did your job.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a regimental commander. His name was George Patton. I think he's the third, and his dad was General George Patton in Europe during World War II. And he was a pretty nervous guy to be around. And he had two sayings he'd always say to us. And that was, you're no good to us dead, and find the bastards and pile on. And so that's why my unit was pretty aggressive.
Okay. How were you treated while you were over there?
How was I treated? Well, I never felt like I was being mistreated.
Mm-hmm.
Like I told you, the people were more like you know, beggars, and of course they probably, because they were poverty.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as the lieutenants and sergeants, they really never gave us much crap for the simple reason we all had a gun, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
Not that we'd use it, but you know,
Yeah.
that everybody did their job, and if somebody didn't do their job, how should we say, we made sure they did their job.
Okay. How did you adjust to being a U.S. soldier and away from your family? Was that difficult or just?
No, it wasn't difficult. You know, it's discipline. Mm-hmm. and structure, and that's what I had at home anyway. So it was nothing new to me. Not that we stood at attention from mom and dad. You know, it wasn't anything like that. But it was still structure. That's what helped.
Okay. All right. So now, tell me about some of your experiences during the war. Like, what did you do?
What did I do? Well, the first 3 months, you know, like I told you, I was in resupply, and there's actually 3 places for resupply. There's the the rear area where it was just like almost living in the United States. And then there's the trains area, which is kind of the halfway point between there and the forward area where the action was. And I was in the forward area. I would unload helicopters and load helicopters back up and stay, how should we say, stay really dirty physically because of the dust and the stuff, and you hardly ever took a bath. I can imagine what we smelled like because we sweat a lot in the dirt and all that. But that was the first 3 months, and that's where I saw action and had to shoot at people and stuff. And I had an angel on my shoulder because there was one time a mortar fell about 10 feet from me one night, and it didn't go off.
Wow.
And so I knew I had an angel on my shoulder. But then how should we say, my next 9, see, you're over there for 1 year, and then you got to come home. Then my next 9 months, I was a liaison. That's a person that goes in between. What my job was, for my squadron of about 1,500 guys, I was in, I think they called it S2 or S4. It was supply. And I would get requisitions from the S2, we'll call it, and then I would go to the depot and pick it up, whatever, or like new M16s or blankets or cooking utensils or paper plates or blankets, you name it, I picked it up. Tanks, personnel carriers. Anyway, I pick it up and I would take it to the area where they need it. And sometimes that was the forward area. So I was driving in and out of action, so we'd say. I was always supposed to take convoys, but a lot of times Colonel Patton didn't believe in that. He just said, run the roads. Now that means you go without protection, and so you're vulnerable. But he knew what was going on, so really nothing ever happened when I ran the roads. There was a few times in convoys. On a convoy, you would have protection front, middle, and the end. Then you had helicopters, gunships flying. And so he was pretty well protected there, but every once in a while the gunships would start firing off. And so, but you felt more protected with the convoy. And one time he told me I was going to go to the Bob Hope Christmas show. It's Christmas time. And I get a phone call from him, from Colonel Patton. Said, I want 5 personnel carriers at Loch Ninh. Now that's almost to the Cambodian border. It was about 40 miles from Saigon. And he says, you know how to get there? I says, yeah, I know how to get there. Been there several times. Okay, I'm flying in 4 guys to take the 5 personnel carriers. That means I had to take the lead one. And so off we went. No problem. And we went through several towns. We went through a town by the name of Quan Loy. And it was a marketplace where when you go through there, it's just gobs of people, kids, women, trying to sell stuff like, what they grew and what they made. And we hit Quan Loy, and the streets it was a ghost town. There wasn't even a dog in the street. And we stopped before we went in. I looked at the other guys, stuck my head out of the personnel carrier and looked, and they all went like, yeah, they knew what it meant. The enemy's in the territory. And so we just put the pedal to the metal, and away we went, just through the town as fast as we could, and nothing. Well, that was about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. We got to Loch Ninh, got personnel carriers there all safe, and then they asked me, okay, you got to get back to Long Bend. You want to go with A company on personnel carriers that patrol the roads to make sure they're protected, or you go with Captain Perry and the helicopter. Well, I chose Captain Perry because it felt a little safer, and I knew what was back there. And then I found out later that A company ran into a whole company of North Vietnamese regular army, and I wasn't involved in any of that because, like I said, I went back with Captain Perry, and that was pretty safe, except for when he dove toward the Saigon River and sampans. They take the helicopters and dive at the the guys in their sampans floating up the river, and then that would make them duck or fall out of the sampan. They just do that to be ornery. And then you wonder why they didn't like us. But getting back to A company, they fought with that, and of course when they saw action, you're talking about probably 15 personnel carriers with 4 to 6 guys on each personnel carrier with weapons firing away, and they ran out of ammunition. But in the meantime, they called for K Company to come in and help, and K Company was about 10 miles away, and they got there just in time because they both ran out of ammunition. The North Vietnamese Army, and so did the A Company, and so luckily K Company came, and then they wiped them out. And anyway, that was one of the, I don't know, I wasn't scared. I can remember that. I was more like, you wondered what it's like to get shot. What's it like to die? That's what you're thinking of. You're not thinking of being scared, but you're also thinking of, I'm not going to show these guys I'm scared.
Yeah.
And that's the way they felt too. And so that's why everybody did their job, and no problem. And so I can't ever remember in the whole 11 months, 29 days, 11 hours I was over there, that I was scared. I would say probably the only really scared part was getting on the plane flying back over the ocean. I can't swim. Okay.
So what was a typical day like?
What was a typical day like? Well, I had 2 typical days, okay? My first 3 months and my last 9 months.
Okay.
My first 3 months, the typical day was, first of all, I'm sleeping on a cot, an army cot, if I was lucky. And you had one blanket, it's called a poncho liner, and you had that to keep you warm. You didn't have sheets or other blankets, and you slept in your clothes, and and sometimes you took your boots off, but usually you leave them on, and it wasn't the most pleasant thing. You either slept underneath something, or what else would you sleep? Sometimes you'd sleep in your truck, or in your truck bed. Wherever you could find something pleasant. But now, my last 9 months, I slept in a tent, and with a bed, and rats. Now the rats over there were kind of like miniature mice, or big mice, but they were actually rats. But there weren't that many, and we had dogs around that kind of kept it down, or kept them out of our way. But I'd get up from that, and we'd have breakfast. I'm in the last 9 months. I would get up, go to breakfast in some other company's mess hall, and eat breakfast, and then I'd go back and find out if I need to get anything and where I had to take it, and if I didn't have to do anything, you sat around and wrote letters. I wrote a lot of letters in Vietnam, and let's see. And I should have wrote a diary, but I didn't. Had time to do it. and then at night, and come, if supper time, you'd go somewhere to eat. And then at night, we would sit around and drink. Most of the time, we drink McCarty rum and Coke. We drink a case of Coke and a bottle of McCarty rum. You know, that's just so we could sleep. And that way, we didn't worry about being shot with mortars and stuff. So.
And so, did you see a lot of combat?
Not a lot, but enough. I sure didn't glorify it.
Yeah. Okay. How would you deal with tragedies you saw, or?
Well, you just kind of like you just thought to yourself, well, glad that wasn't me.
Yeah.
The most, how should we say, the most tragic one that I saw that kind of bothered me for a while was we were in Loch Ninh area, and that's where we were in an LZ, and the Vietnamese people would come to us and try to sell us stuff, and whatever they could sell. And I can remember this one girl, her name was Mai, if I can remember right. And she came from the north. She could speak English because she went to a Catholic school in the north, and she speak real good English. And she sold us, plastic cups that we could drink water out of. Ordinarily, if we wanted to drink a water, we would go to the water tank and put our heads underneath the spout and drink. Well, now we have a cup, a plastic cup. And anyway, she sold us that, and she with her English, she sit around and talk, and what life was like, where she came from. And she said, I want to come to the South where people are free. Of course, the North was communist rule by Ho Chi Minh and all that. But I thought, then she left one morning, her group, they left, and we left later that morning, and going down the road, you could see where a lambretta, that's kind of like a lambretta, how should I explain it? It's like a oversized golf cart, and where people could ride in the back, and you could see it hit a landmine, blew up, and there was mine, and her body wasn't anything to talk about.
Wow.
And so that was the one time it kind of hit me like, oh, it was bad. So.
Okay.
There was one other time that I didn't see anything, but I went on a convoy and came back, and when I got back, my best friend, Jimmy Abernathy, who in my room underneath the flag, at school, there's a piece of paper there with a scratched out name from the wall. That was him. And my guy I went in the service with told me that, Jimmy was killed, I go, well, how did he get killed? He was a chaplain's assistant. That's probably the easiest job there was. And they said, well, he volunteered to go on a patrol, while he was in base camp. I go, what? I said, I would not have let him done that. But I was gone, because usually once in a while they asked us to go on patrol. What we did on patrols were at night, get the old green stuff on our face, and we'd go out and just sit out in the jungle and watch for the enemy to come. And that it was very successful because it kept the enemy away from our base camp, because they knew we had patrols out there. And but Jimmy went out, and they said he made he made one mistake: never leave yourself in the open. Always be kind of hidden or camouflage or something, you know. And he was wide open, and you know, just one shot and got him.
Wow.
So that was probably the saddest time.
Yeah. Good. So when did you get to come home?
I got to come home in May, and boy, that was a good feeling.
Yeah.
I was, how should we say, not drunk, but high, just a high feeling, you know, like after you win the state championship game, you
Yeah.
know. You know, you're at a high for about 2-3 days, you know. But I was for a high for about 2 weeks.
Yeah.
I was happy to come home. It was a good feeling.
So once you were home and the war was over, did life return to normal, or were things permanently changed?
Well, good question. No, I didn't. Yeah, life changed. First of all, I was smarter. You know, I had a better opinion of myself, and I had to go back to the east coast of Fort Eustis, Virginia, for 6 months to serve out my remaining 2 years. And my job, when I got there, my job was mail clerk for a company of about 200 guys that hardly ever wrote a letter or even know how to write a letter. And I'd average probably 10 letters a day and 200 people. And that was my job. And then I would go to the PX, the Post Exchange, you know, like, it's kind of like the Walmart, you know, and I'd buy a thick book and I'd read it. That's what I did all day, was read in my mail office, you know. And then fall came, and they had a battalion football, so I played football.
Cool.
And this was just like high school football. It was 6-man, and they played with pads and helmets and everything, and had referees. And on Friday night, it was just like I was back in high school.
Cool.
And I played. There was I think there was a 7-game schedule, something like that. And in the 6th game, I dislocated my elbow, or hyperextended it, and this forearm was laying back like this. You know, and I was digging one heck, and it was just pouring down rain. And I was digging one heck of a hole with this other arm, you know, because, oh man, it hurt.
Yeah.
Luckily, my commanding officer knew what to do. He grabbed these 2 fingers and just kind of turned my hands. I still remember feeling him turning the hand, and he brought it right up on my chest. Of course, my elbow's about this big around now because it was dislocated. And then they took me to the hospital, and the doc and 5 other guys held me down to get the elbow back in.
Wow.
And they got it in there. But that was a relief when that happened. And I can remember they gave me 5 shots, you know, not to feel the pain, but I still felt it.
Oh, wow.
But the doc told me, he says, you probably didn't feel it because you were looking at it and you was remembering what the pain was like. And he said, that's probably what your trouble was. But then I got convalescent leave with that. So I got 2 weeks to drive back we rented a car, and a friend and I, we went back to Iowa and enjoyed 2 weeks in Iowa, and came back, finished up the tour.
Nice. Did you go back to college then, right after
I
finished your 2
got
years?
out of the service on January 2nd, and I was back in college January 15th, something like that. Yeah, I went right back in, and I just remember college was so much easier when I got back. I don't know why, but it was easy. Of course, I spend more time studying.
Um, if you could explain the war in one word, what would it be?
What would it been? Explain the war in one word. Mm-hmm. I'd probably figured out what that word would be about this afternoon, about 3 o'clock. But, uh,
That's okay if you don't.
well, yeah. Let's see. Well, we could have won that war if we would have waited a couple more days before we surrendered.
Oh, really?
Because back in 1996, I went back to Vietnam with generals and colonels and captains. They were all retired, but we went back for a return tour, and we actually had an audience with the head of state in South Vietnam and North, and they all told us that, they were lucky because the South, the Viet Cong, were ready to surrender, a few days before we left the country.
Wow.
And Ho Chi Minh, the guy in the north, said that if he was going to wait 2 more days for the bombing, and then we quit the bombing. Nixon called a halt to the bombing to the north, and he was going to surrender. And and it's I don't know how many people have told me that, but I actually had it told to my face,
Wow.
that they were thinking about it.
Wow.
They were only days away from it.
That's crazy.
So it wasn't like we lost the war. It's just that we gave up a little bit too soon.
So have your views on the war changed over time?
No, not really.
And what lessons did you learn that you'd want other people to remember from that time in history?
Oh, okay. What lessons we learn? One thing, don't go into a war that you can't win. You should know whether you can win or not. It's kind of like playing a football game or a basketball game. You got an idea whether you can win or lose, but then you play the game, and who knows what can happen. But the war is about the same way.
Okay. So, what kinds of things have you been involved with in being a Vietnam War veteran?
My old regiment out of Vietnam, we have reunions every summer, and I finally found out about it in 1992, and so Gail and I went, my wife and I went to it, and you laugh together, you pray together, you cry together, you drink a lot of beer, and you tell a lot of stories, and it is cool. And you remember who fallen and all that, and it's a 3-day thing that worthwhile. And they have it every summer, and that was the 6th one they had in '92, and now this year they had it in San Antonio, Texas, and it was the 31st one.
Oh, wow.
And I haven't been able to go to them, the last 8-10 years, because they used to always have them the first weekend in August, and I was free at that time, being teaching. But now they moved it to in September. Well, I'm still teaching, and I referee football, and I'm contracted to referee games, and so it isn't like you can just take off.
Yeah.
And so maybe this next summer I can go. This next summer it's in Orlando, Florida, Disneyland or World, I guess.
Yeah.
But now the other thing I was involved was this right here, this Freedom Flight. Yeah, that was something else. Oh,
Yeah.
that was, This guy's picture right here tells you the story right there. And you remember like that.
Mhm.
And I met quite a few people in this,
Mhm.
and that was going on. But this was really something, and I always encourage people now that they got another freedom flight going to Washington D.C. like this in May, and I encourage people to give to it. Because it costs money to send all those veterans back,
Mhm.
and oh, it made you feel better.
Yeah. Cool.
Because when I came back from Vietnam, we landed in Travis Air Force Base in California, and then we was bused to San Francisco Airport, and we had to walk through the airport, with our Army, because in order to get standby, we had to have our Army uniforms on. Well, of course, you got the hippies out there,
Yeah.
hey man, dude, all that, but and they'd spit on you walking through,
So you
calling
did
us baby
experience
killers
that.
and that, and but they, it was just like like that how they spit. They didn't really get much on you, but it was just a sign like, oh,
Yeah.
not like it is today,
Mhm.
and so. Anyway, well, those are a few of the things that are still involved with it.
Okay. And what does it mean to you to be a Vietnam War veteran?
What does it mean to me? Well, well, I always thought, well, I was a veteran that we lost the war until '96, and I thought, nah, we won the war. We just never finished it.
Mhm.
And yeah, it feels good that when we went to this, it made us feel good.
Yeah.
This was something else, Emma. Let me tell you. When we came home back to Omaha, 5,000 people welcome us.
Oh my goodness.
That's just a minor of what they
Yeah.
clapping, and it was something else.
That's
Let me
awesome.
tell you.
Cool.
You want to look at that? You
Sure.
look at that
Yeah.
when you get done.
Very cool. Anything else you'd like to add?
Well, the war made me grow up, made me find out that, hey, I can do whatever I want. I'm good enough at it, because when I got to college, a lot of the kids in college at that time, of course I was older. I was probably 4 years older than them, or 5. They would come to my room and ask me for their advice. What do you think about this? What do you think I should? What are you asking me for? I'm just a college student too. Why don't you ask your professor? But and so they showed how should we say? Oh, like they have confidence in me or something.
Cool.
And so, and that's one thing that helped me, was having confidence.